Good morning, and welcome to today's event, The Future of the Chief Sustainability Officer. My name is Natalie Gonzalez, Senior Program Assistant in the Global Membership Department at the IIF. Thank you for joining us. We are going to keep the program moving quickly so we can end on time. We'll begin today with opening remarks from IIF President and CEO Tim Adams, followed by a keynote presentation on the future of the CSO by Damian Hales, partner at Deloitte. And then we'll close with a panel discussion moderated by IIF's Chief of Staff, Greer Mizels. It is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker for today, Mr. Tim Adams.
Great. Thank you, Natalie, and happy Wednesday to all of you. Thank you for tuning in today. It's an incredibly important topic for all of us here at the IIF. And before I get started, a big shout out to Deloitte that's been a fabulous partner in this journey over the last 8 or 9 months. We have an excellent relationship with Deloitte. We work with them on a broad number of topics, and this has really been a great project. And also my colleague, Greer Mizels, you'll hear from in a minute, our in-house superstar, has shepherded this process through internally. So thank you to both of you for all that you've done. Sustainability is one of the most important topics we work at the IIF. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't spend a substantial amount of my time focused on the topic of sustainability, climate, ESG, and financing a transition to a low carbon or net zero carbon global economy. It is the most important issue for our board. We had a board meeting a few weeks ago. It's the second board meeting in a row where my bosses, the heads of these institutions that are members of the IIF, have told me, make this your top priority, focus all your time and attention. This is the most consequential issue that we will work on in our professional careers. It's time to stop talking and really show advancement. And so that's what we're doing. And working with the CSOs at our partner organizations is a key part of advancing that agenda. We have many really great CSOs or similar titled individuals on the agenda here today, and we are interacting with them on a regular basis. If you haven't read the report, I do urge you to do so. It's chock full of really good meaty ideas and insights. One I think so important is just the first tipping point, which is where external events move more quickly than internal events. Someone internally has to be the surveyor of those external events, and then the chief cat herder internally of bringing all the various departments across the organization together. And that is certainly happening. And with respect to sustainability, external events are moving at a rapid pace, much more rapidly than many organizations can keep up with. So it falls to the chief sustainability officer, and again, of similar titles, to be the chief disruptor and force the organization to observe what's going on externally and then to reallocate resources internally. And sometimes it's just time and attention of senior leadership to reallocate those resources to this incredibly important topic. So with that, we're going to turn to Damian Hales, who's got an excellent presentation. I hope that all of you stay plugged in through the entire event today. But this is not just an episodic event. This is a topic, again, that we're dealing with on a daily basis. We want to hear from you. We want to get your feedback. We want your involvement. We want to make you a part of this really wonderful journey. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Damian, and thanks to all of you who've tuned in today.
Thank you very much, Tim. I can honestly say it's been an absolute pleasure working with IIF on this important topic, and obviously closely with Greer. So hello, everybody. I'm Damian Hales. I'm a partner in our Deloitte's Risk Advisory practice based here in London, and I'm our ESG lead for banking. I'm delighted to give you some short executive summary on our joint Deloitte and IIF paper on the future of the Chief Sustainability Officer. The title on the cover page gives away, I think, some of the content in the actual deck itself. So we talk about sense maker in chief. And what does that mean in practice? It's around digesting and interpreting the sustainability domain on behalf of the business. And rather than just digesting it, working out, therefore, how the business needs to respond from both a regulatory, but more importantly, from a strategic perspective. There was a quote from one of the interviewees that I think encapsulates absolutely perfectly what the role of the CSO is. The CSO needs to be the conductor of the orchestra, making sure everybody's got the same objective and working with the same tools and moving at the same pace. So in other words, this is all around harmony and alignment, not necessarily about musical talent per se. So let me just give you a little bit about background and the objectives of the report itself. So in terms of the background and in terms of the report itself, it was made up of sort of three fact bases or three sources. First of all was the market participant survey, which we conducted between July and September last year. We then followed that up with a number of selected interviews across the globe with CSOs or other senior executives on the results of the survey and got their comments and quotes on some of the findings and the insights. And then we supplemented that by speaking with a number of Deloitte sustainability and other subject matter experts to help interpret the results and provide some insight to you, the reader. The objectives behind commissioning the report was actually twofold. So first of all, as Tim said in his introduction, to understand financial services firms and how they're mobilizing to address the ESG imperative. And it truly is an imperative. The second point was, how do financial services firms see the role of the CSO evolving to meet this ESG imperative? So they're the two objectives that we tried to cover in the report. And we did that, we structured that in terms of this executive summary, but also the paper itself, to answer 5 key questions. Why do some firms have CSOs while others do not? From that, what is the mandate do firms typically give to their CSO or CSO equivalent? What are the skills and leadership attributes needed to deliver against that mandate? 4, how do CSOs contribute to the firm's governance, around the broader governance, but also just around sustainability? And 5, how is this role likely to evolve in the future? So without further ado, let's actually get into the meat of the report. Right, so as Tim said at the start, there's actually 3 tipping points. The first one is all around change. So when the external environment is changing faster than the inside of the organization can change to adapt to it, then you need somebody else on point whose responsibility is, as I said before, to digesting that information and then trying to restructure the organization and business model such that the pace of change in the external environment is the same as the pace of change within the organization itself. Now, in the actual report, we looked at some articles, some sustainability articles over just a 2-week window, and the amount of those articles, both in terms of voluntary code, changes to regulation across the globe, was immense. So you can truly see the magnitude of the challenge that organizations are facing, and therefore why they might want to have a CSO type role. The second tipping point is all around stakeholder expectations. So where the number of stakeholders, the breadth of the stakeholders' expectations becomes so large that the existing C-suite can't meet it, at that point, we're also seeing organizations start to look at appointing a CSO or a CSO equivalent. And a key thing here is that linked to that is what's the mandate then of the CSO? Well, obviously it's implied in this tipping point in that the CSO is responsible for knowledge gathering and, more importantly, for knowledge transfer within the organization. So what are the stakeholders' expectations? How do I then relay those expectations inside the organization? And then, more importantly, how do I actually then meet those expectations? The third tipping point is all around strategic risks. So when ESG risks become strategic, the CSO is needed not just to liaise with the Chief Risk Officer and the Chief Compliance Officer, but also with the CEO and business heads to truly make sure that ESG is seen as a strategic imperative. And then when you combine all of those tipping points together, you start to get this idea around what we call the CSO as a sense maker in chief. Where there's confusion, they bring coordination. Where there's a dynamic external environment, lots and lots of different stakeholders with different expectations and lots of different risks, be those credit, market, operational, climate and strategic in nature, bring it all together and tell a consistent story. Where there wasn't a CSO or CSO equivalent, the finding was firmly that it wasn't important. It more came across as either there was an existing individual or team of individuals who already had a similar role, or that it just wasn't yet, i.e. the organization hadn't quite reached one of those tipping points. It wasn't that it wasn't needed. In fact, only sort of 19% of people came back to say it was either too small or not needed in their organization. We move on to the next slide. We'll then start talking about what is the mandate of the CSO. And obviously, when you start to think about those tipping points, it becomes clear, I think it gives you some hints as to what the mandate is. The first one is make sense of that external environment, that fast changing external environment with lots of different stakeholders and lots of different actors, and bring that insight back to the organization. They do this, though, in order to reconfigure or help the organization reconfigure its business model. So that's the second most important mandate of the organization. The idea being there that if you just comply with regulation, everyone has to, all organizations have to comply with those regulations. So you don't ever give yourself a strategic advantage. The idea is if I start to understand where the direction of travel is, I can then help the strategy of the organization get ahead of that direction of travel and give myself a strategic advantage in the future through my strategy. The third element is the how. So how do they do this? Well, actually, what they do is they provide thought leadership and they align teams through engaging, educating, and connecting. The quote below, I think, typifies that perfectly. The CSOs observe that they join the dots. And since they work at so many different interactions, working with marketing around marketing plans, you may speak with finance around ICAPs or potentially around TCFD disclosures, risk we've already talked about around climate risk management, stress testing, the business when it comes to structuring products and services. You've got maybe procurement when it comes to procuring services. The role of the CSO is effectively almost that they have fingers and hands in every single pie across the organization and make sure that that organization is operating as one. So that's a clear view as to what the mandate is. If we move on to the next slide, we'll talk about a little bit more about the skills and leadership responsibilities in order to deliver that mandate. I think the first thing to say up front, and I'm sure a few of our panelists would agree, the role of a CSO or equivalent is not an easy one. It's almost asking the impossible, because if you look at the blend of skills, technical and leadership, it becomes clear that what you're looking for is somebody that has really, really good strategic nous. We've talked before about it needing to influence and implement strategy. They've got to have fantastic influencing skills to change behaviors, change the operating model, and to ensure that harmony that we talked about. They need to have a really good organizational knowledge, because what they have to do is understand the power base of the organization, specific organizational or personal objectives, and therefore know what levers to pull, when, and how hard. And finally, they need to be flexible, because no two organizations are the same, so it's not a cookie cutter approach. The CSO needs to be flexible in the tools and techniques that they use to influence different parts of the business. In the survey itself, we split these skills into technical and leadership. Under technical skills, you will see that there is some domain expertise around disclosures, reporting, climate science, risk and regulation, but actually they're not the most critical skills. The most critical skills of a CSO are strategic and influencing. So what we're saying here is that the CSO must have that domain experience to be credible and for people to want to engage with them. But this isn't a subject matter expert role, and therefore to some extent on the periphery. This is firmly a strategic role and is therefore at the core of the organization. Under leadership skills, the two most important roles are that of executor and agitator. So as many heritage CSOs or equivalents or new enrolled CSOs will attest, an important trait is an agitator for change, i.e. trying to get their organization to recognize the strategic imperative associated with sustainability. However, it's probably safe to say, as Tim alluded to right at the very, very start, and as I've alluded to, the number of articles out there on a weekly basis on sustainability, that times are changing. And increasingly, CSOs are no longer having to agitate in most markets. What they are expected to do is execute, i.e. they are expected to make things happen. So be that supporting the business in developing new products and services, or helping risk or compliance better understand the risks that they face in doing business. So it's safe to say it is not an easy role being a CSO, but it is strategically very, very important. What we'll then touch on is what is the CSO's role in governance. Now, the first thing to say is that across the globe and across various sectors of the financial services industry, there is not one single governance arrangement that is in place. There are multiple different roles. But to this point previously around the CSO being an orchestrator and the CSO being a sense maker in chief, what we find is that the CSO may have different roles across all of these different type of committees. And just to give you some examples, so they may have a role around strategy setting. They may have a role around risk management and how does ESG incorporate into the risk management framework. They may have a role around external disclosures, investor relations, and just general marketing material. They may have some role around policy assurance or external disclosure assurance to the audit committee. They may have a role in working out the compensation and remuneration because it's a direct influence on the culture and behaviours within the organisation, and obviously therefore can incentivise the right behaviours, i.e. we are supporting transition to a low carbon economy, and we can do that through compensation and remuneration. Also looking at the governance and nominations committee, are we making sure we've got the right skills? If sustainability is going to be core of the most organisation strategy going forward, how do I upskill all those people and not just rely on a single ESG or sustainability team, but actually how does everybody from the front office, the second line and third line have those sustainability skills? And also what we're starting to see is additional board committees such as specific sustainability committees that try to pull together front office products and structuring, maybe views around risk management, potentially on disclosures and on philanthropy into one committee so that that alignment is in place and that actually the strategic objectives of the organisation are correctly manifesting themselves in the behaviours across all the organisation. Our final question was around how the role will evolve. So I guess the key statistic that comes out on the survey is that 99% of respondents said that they believe the role of the CSO will become more important in the near term for all of those reasons that we've talked about before. But 99% of people said it was more important in the near term. When we started to explore over a longer period, there was still a view that says that they see the CSO continuing to be a distinct role, and that was still the vast majority. But there were other schools of thought that say, given the strategic nature of the role, it may migrate to a CEO. Given again the fact that it's a core to the overall business and integral to the overall business success, it might migrate to the CFO. And a few people said that actually it won't be required. And the rationale for that it won't be required is that instead of talking about sustainable finance, we'll just talk about finance. Instead of just talking about ESG risk, it just becomes risk. So in other words, sustainability is so ingrained into everything that is done within the organisation across all the functions that you don't need a separate role to act as that orchestrator, because that orchestration already happens through the existing committee structures and through the existing interactions. So to bring that to life, I just wanted to end this presentation on the next slide. Just got a couple of quotes. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the quotes that firmly suggest that the CSO is a key role, key C-suite role, and is here for the future, for that orchestration and sense maker in chief elements we talked about. So I like the quote second in from the left. Sustainability now is like risk. Everyone manages risk, but you still need to have a CRO. But there's also a school of thought that says in the longer term, maybe the role of the CSO will subtly be different. One classic quote that was said that was, ultimate success will be if we are no longer needed. So in other words, sustainability is absolutely core, absolutely core. So with no further ado, thank you very much. That was a overview of the paper itself. Please read it, and if you have any questions, please ask myself or Greer, and we'll happily answer them.
Great. Thank you so much, Damien. That was really a fantastic summary of our findings. And as Damien mentioned, for those who are interested in learning more, please take a look at the report. I believe it's now live on the IIF website, www.iif.com. And we welcome all comments and feedback. But without further ado, I'm very excited to move into our panel discussion to see how some of our findings really are playing out in reality within the institutions themselves, especially as ESG concerns take center stage in the financial services industry and are increasingly hitting the bottom line. So joining me today are 4 individuals who will provide some terrific perspectives on these questions. With me, we have Andrew Boley, who is the Wholesale Governance Officer and Deputy Chair of the Wholesale Sustainability Forum at Nomura. Laura de Mesa, Head of Responsible Banking at Santander. Vanessa Otto-Mentz, who's the Partner in the Risk Advisory Practice at Deloitte. And Val Smith, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Citi. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Before we jump into the discussion, I just want to remind everyone again that this is an interactive session, so please feel free to submit questions throughout the discussion, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I see some of you are already starting to put in questions, which is great. And as a reminder, just submit them using the session Q&A box on your screen. So I guess at the risk of stating the obvious in a technical sense, Val, you are the panelist that has the actual title of CSO. But to a certain extent, that really reinforces some of the findings that we found during our research, which is though the titles may vary, the scope of responsibilities are often quite similar. So to level set, I thought it would be great to hear from each of you about sort of what your day-to-day responsibilities actually are. Laura, as the Head of Responsible Banking at Santander, why don't we start with you? What's a day in the life?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone, and thank you for the IIF for making, for the report and this event, and inviting us here. I mean, a day today is quite intense and curious, I'm one of the ones saying that our success will be not to remain here in 5-10 years time, but in the meantime, we have quite a busy agenda, I think there's no doubt sustainability has increased in relevance. I think this was already coming, but the consensus has somehow increased mainly in the last 2 years. I recall October 2019 annual meetings, World Bank, Washington, and the very high consensus around the world needing more than cheap money and green economy being part of the solution for that happening. Since then, climate change momentum has just increased, and COVID-19, if we needed anything, has, I think, been an additional catalyst to really show us and convince us of the increasing relevance of embedding ESG factors, criteria in everything we do. So what is the day-to-day? I just would, recover, some of the words that Damien was sharing with us, what we need being sustainability in such a big organization such as ours is really landing our purpose, helping people and businesses prosper, and making it happen in the day-to-day. Is orchestrating, is engaging, is convincing everyone on what is that they can do for us to become a more responsible organization. It's about the strategic vision, planning, and making it happen in the day-to-day, and is connecting initiatives so to make a meaningful impact. So of course, it's not just doing a lot, but doing really things that can have a positive impact on the priorities that we have set. I would just briefly mention, when you are a bank with the footprint of Santander, mainly Americas and Europe, you can do many things we aim to do. Supporting diversity or higher education, but there are 2 things on which we cannot be felt missing. One is financial inclusion, and another, I think, is climate change, helping our clients on doing the transition. And those are being our main priorities in terms of efforts. I will stop there. Thank you, dear.
Thank you, Laura. Vanessa, of course, you're currently a partner at Deloitte, but prior to joining, you were the head of strategy and sustainability at one of Africa's leading general insurance companies. So maybe you could kind of speak to this question, both with your current hat, but also with your previous hat.
Thanks, Greer, and thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be here with everyone. Yes, I was thinking how the 2 perspectives differ. My previous role, I left there last year, and I spent quite a lot of time, I would say, doing similar things than what's in the report and what we just heard as well around influencing, but both internal and external to the organization. I found that I was quite like an entry point where people would come to ask about well, what does Santam know about climate risk, for example? And there was a lot of assumptions around what an insurer gathers and the data that's available. So there was quite a lot of this, I almost want to call it brokering between the inside and the outside around what people's expectations are and what's possible, and also the other way around, where my team and I had expectations of finance and the actuarial department, and they were telling us, but we have this and not that data. So I think there's a lot of brokering and convincing and influencing that takes part, lots of conversation. And I also want to say listening very carefully to what people are actually saying rather than, what is obvious. That is not that different to my current role. I just think the audience is different. I now listen to clients and I'm helping them navigate this reality of being a broker in an organization, trying to move and nudge an organization forward when things are actually rather complex and no one has the answers. There aren't clear standards. It's not fully regulated yet. So I would say, yes, lots of listening, lots of conversations, and lots of simplifying. And trying to take that next step forward with people.
Thank you. Yeah, Damien wasn't wrong in saying that this seems like sometimes almost an impossible sort of position, given everything that you all need to do on a daily basis. Andrew, we'll be talking a little bit later about the importance of governance vis-a-vis this type of role, but as wholesale governance officer, what all falls under your job description at Nomura? Does it kind of track with what the other panelists have been saying thus far?
Yes, Greer, thank you very much. It's perhaps slightly different and actually ties in with one of the questions that I've seen has come up, which is around the sort of advisory roles to senior management and CEO in particular. So my role within Nomura is sat in London in the international wholesale division of a Japanese investment bank. The bank has a retail business in Japan with 123 branches across the country. It's got an asset manager, and then it's got the international wholesale division. So I'm supporting the head of that division in a number of governance topics, but by far the largest, it's everything to do with sustainability. So it's advising and steering, but allowing him ultimately to take that full responsibility for the sustainability agenda within the business. So the first thing we did around this was to create something we call a wholesale sustainability forum. So essentially the magnet, the glue that holds all this together, as a central discussion forum from key stakeholders. And those stakeholders come together on a monthly basis, and we understand the various dynamics that affect our business, the linkage points, and have created a massive center of gravity around that piece of work. And that's tremendous because there's two different dimensions fundamentally to sustainability. There's the business opportunity, and for us that centers around M&A and advisory, where we bought last year Green Tech Capital Advisors, which was the leading renewable infrastructure related M&A advisor. So 80 experts coming into the organization from that channel. We've got strong DCM activity, thought leadership, research, and so on. But there's also alongside that, of course, the societal element of it as an organization. So, we also need to consider how we as an organization embrace ESG through the culture, through alignment to SDGs, through our emissions standards and development. And ultimately all of that embodies itself in our own ESG rating. So, this structure has allowed us to bring all of that together into a single place. The gravity and the magnetism of the center allows all of the thoughts to sort of orbit around that in a more coherent way. So very, very exciting to see the report and the references here. I think the sense maker in chief is certainly something I can very strongly align my role to. Thanks, Greer.
Great, thank you, Andrew. And of course, Val, as the CSO on the panel, how do you think what everybody else has says kind of tracks with how you see your responsibilities? Did all of this resonate with you?
Yes, all of this resonated, and I want to say, as I was looking at the report, it felt like partly it was helping me to make sense of my own role and how my role and my team's role has changed through the years. Also felt like a little bit of a, therapy session. Like, this is why I feel the way I do at the end of some days, because there are just so many different hats that we have to wear, even in a single day. And I've been at Citi for 16 years. I joined in 2004 and joined into the sustainability function. So I've been able to really grow professionally as the issues around sustainability and ESG have also grown. And I think the sense maker in chief naming really makes a lot of sense. That's obviously, I think, increasingly something that we're spending a lot of time doing, because the financial sector in particular really seems to be in the crosshairs, or front of the stage, whether you view it as an opportunity or a risk, um, in terms of how is our sector helping to use finance and capital to help to support the change that we're already seeing in the world. And so as I look at sort of like a past, present, future in terms of what I've been engaged in and my team has been engaged in at Citi, I think that when I joined in 2004, there was a lot of focus on, some of these early areas like stakeholder engagement, the listening that was mentioned by other panelists, and sort of the negotiating, trying to explain what we were doing and why we were doing certain things. Disclosure very early on was really part of our bread and butter as well. Using disclosure as a tool to really also drive metrics and drive performance. And then you started to see, more of a focus on the sustainability team and sustainability professionals really needing to integrate into the business, to advise the business on risks, to advise the business on opportunities, how to, develop certain sustainable finance products is something we spend a lot of time on now. And then you sort of look ahead to the future. And I think the future looks like all of those activities, but also, as the report pointed out, increasing focus on alignment within the company so that we are all marching toward the same priorities. We are all, marching in the same direction, and just being really efficient. There's so much work to be done in this area. There's a lot of noise also. And how do we, really help to chart the path forward toward the North Star? I think that, thinking about governance also was mentioned and highlighted in this report. And I believe that that's really important. I think as we start to think about integration of sustainability and ESG issues into the companies, into our businesses, that setting up the right governance structures to help to affect that change is super important. So, whether you're looking at board engagement, whether you're looking at how ESG metrics are tied to executive performance and compensation, I think those are sort of structural levers that that are going to become increasingly important. And then, the sort of going back to the beginning, the engagement, the deep listening internally and externally, because as much as we all may be focused on, certain issues right now, whether it's climate change or racial equity, there are other issues that will, come onto center stage as well. And we need to be sort of out there listening for the signals of what's next. So I basically think about our role and think about, our days as wearing lots of different hats all in the same day and sitting at lots of different tables and needing to make sense of all of those tables.
Great. Thank you so much, Val. A question came in, which I would almost consider like a meta question, which is, what is your individual definition of the word sustainability? So, we talk about the Chief Sustainability Officer. In your answers, it's encompassed a lot of different things. We have financial inclusion, climate, other social governance issues, obviously. But how would each of you define that? I don't know who would like to go first.
I'll give it a go, Greer. I think for me, sustainability is really about looking at the organization's role in a longer time frame. How does that organization create value for itself and its stakeholders? And when I say itself, there's also something about the organization's own sustainability. Is it going to carry on and be able to sustain itself? But at the same time, what's the impact it's having on the world? And how is the world impacting on it? And it's that sort of nuance between those dynamics that an organization must navigate. And we use different shorthands for it. ESG is very common in financial services, but it basically says know what's happening in the environment, know what's happening in society, know what's important in governance and address it. Understand what's important and address it. So for me, that's in a nutshell what I would say. Of course, you can also put and say, how do we contribute to the SDGs? But for me, that's the world strategy. And every organization should connect to it and then still manage its own sustainability as well and these interconnections.
Great. Thank you. Andrew?
Greer, perhaps if I could pick up on that. So, yeah, I think for us, there are 17 SDGs out there, and organizations will align themselves differently against those. So we've stated on our external material, on our disclosures, where we see the best alignment for our organization relative to those 17. But of course, there's a lot of focus around the S and the E in particular at the moment. I sit here, as I said, working for a Japanese bank where the S is really, really important. The role in society is essential. Japanese commerce has a very old traditional term which roughly translates to three-way satisfaction. So the satisfaction of the buyer, the seller, and society, and that linkage is a deep root for us. And we think about the role of ourselves in the local society, and think about sort of poverty levels, education, financial literacy, and things like that. But I think it goes without saying as well that right now there is a huge focus on the environment, and we're seeing that recognised increasingly through better alignment to the Paris targets. Hopefully in Glasgow those targets will be further upgraded, and countries and corporates are aligning themselves to carbon neutrality, and that transformation is itself a fundamental transformation. It's a transformation of the global economy. Significant investment is needed to achieve that, and therefore as a business you have to really think hard about what your role is going to be within that. So for us, the advisory role, the expertise that we brought in with the green tech specialist, for example, helps us really think deeply about the decarbonisation trajectories, and really the challenge is to then integrate that more and more deeply into the rest of the bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
I can sort of jump in if you're still looking for more answers.
Sure.
And
Absolutely.
I think there was a question around, the sort of primacy of the E in ESG, and whether we see that changing. And I guess, reflecting on this question, I sort of believe that, what's old is new again. I mean, if you sort of go back and look at sort of the fundamental purpose of a corporation, and how maybe, to some extent we were a little bit distracted from some of these core purposes and values of the company. And I think are now coming back around to that. And we've talked about the importance of listening, which to me translates very nicely to a stakeholder capitalism model. We've talked about, so the importance of long-termism and how the long-term mindset that sustainability teams bring to the table, thinking through all of the different facets of impacts and opportunities, I think is even more important today. In terms of defining sustainability, I went to business school around the time that the triple bottom line was sort of concept was still becoming popularized. So I have always thought of sustainability as being about more than the E, more than the environment, although that's my background, and about being really, how do companies, how does society join up the E and the S in particular to drive value for society, to drive value for companies. So I think that there's been a lot of focus on the E, and sometimes I talk about environmental sustainability just to sort of clarify what facet of sustainability we're talking about. E, part of the focus is that it's more easily measured and more easily defined. There is a taxonomy for it. I think, like Andrew, climate change is the preeminent issue that we work on, and it is a core business strategy issue as well. But I also view climate as very much a social issue. I mean, when you look at the impacts on communities, on countries, and you look at the impacts on workers as we are moving away from, more carbon intensive ways of running our societies, I think that, the S has to be front and center, even as we're dealing with issues like climate change. And I think if there's one thing, well, COVID has taught us many things, right? Like many hard lessons. But I think that there is one thing in particular it's taught us, which is really the importance of integrating the approach of looking at, how different communities are impacted, economically through environmental pollution, how in order to rebuild and build back better, that we really need to have, an all hands on board approach as we're building back to hopefully fight climate change, but also fight income inequality and racial inequity and all of those pieces. So my hope is that, we increasingly are able to pivot to that broader sustainability definition and approach, because I think that's really what's needed to have a holistic solution to some of our challenges.
Greer, I'm the one left. So, I mean, I will subscribe everything that my colleagues just said, okay? And just reinforcing some of the messages. Now, first, I think sustainability is about addressing all of our stakeholders' expectations, understanding stakeholders in a wide concept, no, from employees to communities. And that, we know it well, is a really change of mindset, no, from where we were coming from. And second, I will highlight, as Andrew mentioned, I think it's transformation. It's really transformational. Okay, I mean, it's so big, the change that it also, refers to the culture of organizations and how we are tackling and thinking about the challenges we have ahead and how we want to address them. No, and this needs, because of this transformation, this needs to embed really ESG at the scale. No, so it's not any longer having flagships or good initiatives that may have an impact, but it's really connecting the dots and embedding it into everything you decide, everything you do, no? And third, I will just highlight also, and I think Val referred to this, about this interconnection about the E, the S, and the G. Now, many times we think about the E, the S, and the G as separate items on which we can trade off about, or we can prioritize one or other. And the truth is that they are so connected. I mean, the E, of course, I mean, this is the decade for us to align to Paris. And we need to do that in order to avoid irreversible consequences. No? And that is the reason why climate is becoming so huge in the agenda. That's clear. But if we needed something to remind us, I mean, COVID is here to tell us that social impact is also there, and we cannot forget. And also, Val referred, I mean, the just transition concept that has always been on the climate agenda is key. No? And the G, let's not forget about it, because to me, it's clear the enabler. I mean, we cannot do the S, we cannot do the E's without really the G. No, we do understand we need to do everything in a great way. I mean, we can greener the economy, we can support social challenges. If we don't do the things right, we won't obtain the loyalty of our stakeholders. And without that, our business won't be sustainable. And the first rule of sustainability is profitability. So in order to remain in business and be able to play a role, we need to do that. No? And then I go back to the governance piece that Andrew also mentioned. And I think it's key. I mean, I've been also with Santander for 15 years, having the luxury of leading this responsible banking function for already 2 years. But most important than my appointment was other decisions the group took back in 2018, which was creating a responsible banking board committee, board level governance, meeting quarterly, And that is a push, I have to say. And it's supported by a forum with top executives there that are really, I mean, allowing us to get a lot of traction, okay? So back to you, but I mean, big word, sustainability, and everything said, I do agree.
Yeah, it's a huge job. You know, perhaps kind of a tangential, but in a way, a follow-up question. How do you think others within your organization think about the CSO role or your respective roles? Do you think it's well understood? Some of you have been in your roles for a while, some are more recent. You know, do you receive any pushback from different segments of your organization? I know, Vanessa, you had mentioned this before about, you know, how others see you or see this role. How would you go about answering that?
Thanks, Greer. Yeah, I spent 17 years at Santam in this role. So like Val also saw the past, present, future and share her view on where it started. And I would say the view has changed a little bit. In the beginning, I'm honestly, I mean, I'm a chartered accountant, so I'm used to measuring things and getting into sustainability was putting on, you know, learning to write with my left hand, to be honest, from a right-handed point of view. But once I got it, I got really passionate about it. And I'm sure my colleagues looked at me and thought, what on earth was she smoking? This woman's gone off all green. So I had a lot of that in the beginning. And then I think later on, as we moved through and people saw what this was really about, I mean, I worked for an insurer and risk, and we called it risk on the ground, that is rising up as a fundamental business impact. Your partnerships with cities around how they manage risk impacts very much on building standards, firefighting capabilities, etc. And as we know, with climate risk increasing those physical risks, these have real business implications. So I think later on in the journey, there was much more appreciation and looking at this role as a helper. And often people are, if I look at my actuarial colleagues back at Santam, my underwriting colleagues, they have a lot of business as usual activities every day. They work long hours. They don't have the time to add a lot of extra. So there was a lot of perception around help. You can help me get access to resources that I may not be able to. You can help me cross organizational boundaries that I may not be able to because you can move freely between divisions. So I think there's a bit of a different perception. There's also, I think, people thinking that, oh, this is such a fun job. You know, you've got the best job. Why would you want to do any other job? And I certainly felt that. And then there are those who are a bit more minded around, I think, operational realities who think this is a luxury. But more and more as we go through, I just want, I think we're all realizing that this is just plain good governance. If you are not managing stakeholder expectations, you will suffer the consequences, and that's just plain good governance. And that's becoming accepted. I think one of the trends I'm seeing is lots of questions from CROs and CFOs around, what does this mean for me? How do I actually include this in my role? So yes, there's different perceptions, but I do think it's changing and probably will change some more.
That's interesting. One of the questions that came in was, you know, how do you describe long-term value to your senior leadership without sounding like an activist or too altruistic? But, you know, it sounds like, at least from what a lot of you had said, is that, you know, a lot of this push or this recognition of the importance is really coming from the top. It's coming from the C-suite. It's coming from the board. I don't know if other individuals wanted to touch on the kind of perception issue, but please
perhaps,
feel free.
Yeah, perhaps, Greer, if I could just add, I think that, you know, that differentiation between governance and activist is actually really, really important. You know, to have good governance on this topic, you can't just be seen as an activist. You know, the governance really brings a sense of neutrality, of cohesion, and bringing different views and different ideas together. So for us, it is about having the magnetism and the central gravity of the work, but without necessarily just being seen as an activist. So a good day for me is that, you know, anyone who's got a question, an idea, suggestion, around this topic will say, I know who to go to, because there is someone at the middle who's bringing this all together for the organization. There's a lot of decisions that we have to make as an organization, and those decisions, including the kind of activity we get involved with or don't get involved with, we need to make sure there is good, robust governance around that, and it is sensibly viewed in the context of all the characteristics that we're considering here.
Yeah, if I may jump in. I mean,
Sure.
When I joined the position 28 months ago, yes, I did still see some skepticism in a few, no, or in some. I've already gone through that denial phase, I would say, in the past. No, I remember reaching my colleagues, telling them a liquidity ratio is going to be regulated, and then say, no, that cannot happen. A TLAC requirement is going to happen, and then there's, in addition to capital, and they saying, no, that cannot be. And so I'm used to that. No, I mean, the banking industry is not, in the best moment, and coping with more challenges. It's not that the people, is willing to, no. But at the end, I think that because of what has said, no, stakeholder pressure. Thanks to others. They are doing the job for me, because when the corporate investment banking senior executive comes and say there's no C-level meeting on which we do not talk about sustainability and transition with any of our clients, just as Tim said in his opening remarks, no, then I don't have to any longer try to convince the people in the business. They are seeing from the customers, this is here. When the head of investor relations see the letter of Larry Fink or any other investor, no, I don't have to convince them. It's their own stakeholders that are telling them, no. And the same could apply when talking about regulators, supervisors. So the momentum is so high that I think no one else can deny, no. Then it comes to how to make it happen. What needs to be the speed, the pace, what your priorities should be. And on there, we still have some margin or capacity to decide. But ESG being a must and not a nice to have, and not on something on top of, but something that needs to be embedded on any strategic decision, I think is increasingly an idea that is more present, quite widely across the organization.
Thank you. A couple of questions have come in about your teams. What does your team look like? What sorts of skills and traits are you looking for? A couple of questions have come in about, you all come from a finance background, not necessarily from a climate or ESG background. So, what do you think is a good mix? Are environmental experts part of your team, or do you kind of rely on outside experts and academics to help inform some of your decisions? So I don't know, maybe Val, we can start with you on this one and then go around a little.
Sure. It's a good question. And I think that it's fair to say that sustainability teams are evolving. I think they're still fairly small. My team right now is 6 people, and we're, currently in the final processes of hiring 2 additional people. And then we have different sustainability teams that are embedded in different functions. For example, environmental and social risk and the risks function, sustainable operations and the operations function, and so on. My team actually is primarily comprised of people who started out as subject matter experts. So people who had, come from an environmental background. We have a human rights expert on our team. People, I think increasingly what we are looking for is people who bring some of that subject matter expertise to the table, but also bring knowledge of the finance sector, certainly are very comfortable engaging on, issues, sustainability issues as they impact corporates. I think as a bank, there's so many different industries and areas that we need to have some level of comfort with, whether it's, the plethora of different financial products that we would offer to our clients through all of our different businesses, but also developing expertise in some of those industry sectors. For example, what are the challenges that are sort of uniquely being faced by the energy sector, by the power sector, different industrials, and so on. So, everybody brings to the table a particular area of expertise, but we also need people, those folks also have to be good at communicating. They need to be good at influencing. They need to be good at reading the room. I saw some of the questions related to climate expertise in particular, since that's a more technical area. And even those of us who, sort of came up through an environmental policy or environmental science perspective, like, I majored in environmental science. The discussions around climate change are very different today than they were, back in the 90s. And we are hiring somebody who has more climate expertise for the team, but those other issues still remain important. You can bring that technical skill set, but you also need to be able to, engage at many different levels in the company, and then turn around and communicate to our clients about how our expectations may be changing. So it still, I think, requires people who are, good at understanding outside trends and good at bringing together complex sets of information and clarifying them.
Other thoughts on this question? Oh, yeah, sure.
There's no other. I mean, in terms of subject matter expert, we do try, of course, to partner with the areas, and for them to be the experts on the field, they need to be there. No, I very much agree with Damien at his initial remarks when he said, no, we need to provide thought leadership, lead the agenda, and align efforts. No, so based on that, what we need for people, no, what we are trying to look for are really a strong in analytical skills, so that they can be reliable and credible in their understanding of the trends and fundamentals, and where and how the bank needs to deliver towards. No, I think that in terms of read that, and as also Val was saying, reading the room and understanding where the trends are, I think is very important. Bringing intelligence from external insight, and really separate the noise that Vanessa was referring to, the noise from really what are the fundamentals and what is that you need to focus on. Second, I would say soft skills. You need to persuade and convince colleagues. No, of course, it's great to have a governance and to set targets and to deliver on them. But of course, the best way for the people to really engage is for them to be convinced. And if you want to persuade and convince the people, you need to have very good arguments on that. So you need to do that. And third, I will say, of course, having a sense of purpose and service, to become an ally to everyone. I think this is something also that was highlighted in the report, and I very much agree. As also with all those multiple hats that Val was saying at the beginning, you need to be leading and at the same time in the back. And really, for me, my clients are the areas that I serve within the bank, and trying to convince them to move forward and do the best of they can, to contribute to the agenda. So yeah, those would be, so not easy profiles, but there are great profiles that meet those criteria, of course.
Yeah, that seems to be a common refrain throughout this panel. It's not easy. And I know we hadn't, I don't know if you have any thoughts on kind of your team makeup and what you look for, and
sorry, for me, if I could pick that up. So yeah, the team, I guess ultimately this depends on what it is you're trying to achieve, and it is a broad space. For me, it's a very, very small team. The skill set is more about bringing the organization together, so acting as a glue in the middle, having that sort of organizational nous, savvy, ability to engage with the rest of the organization and navigate the existing hierarchies. So as with any organization, there are functional and divisional and regional management structures in place, including budgeting and planning and strategy. So sort of finding a way to create an overlay on that is really essential. And the other skill that hasn't really been mentioned is sort of program management. So at the end of the day, this to me is a program of work. We have around 50 different kind of mini projects taking place or in and around this. Some of those internal focused, some of those external focused. But having the support and capability to bring all this together, makes a huge difference. So so those skills have been more important for us to say, because we've brought in such a large capability in terms of environmental science and expertise through our advisory network. That particular skill set is more about distributing that through the banking network, and that's where the educational process is coming for us.
Thank you. I noticed that we're, oh, sure. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I echo what everybody said in terms of the teams. My team was quite small at Santam as well. And what I tended to do, especially being in a developing market, you even have less resources, I think, than those in a developed market. I partnered with universities. It's a wonderful resource. You find kindred spirits around research and topic matters, and over time you can build really good relationships. So sort of have an extended team. I echo what Andrew just said about good project management, really key. And people who are able to navigate the hierarchy is very, very important. I mean, you're speaking from board members, CEOs, to very passionate people who are driving change, and you need to be able to hold your own. So be a good facilitator of conversations, learning interventions. And then most importantly, what I looked for was always good systems thinkers. And that's a rare skill. You really have to look for someone who is able to take in all this information, make sense of it, and then actually give it back so something can happen. Otherwise, you're creating more noise. You are not reducing the noise. But yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
No, that's terrific. I think several questions have come in kind of about near-term priorities, but then also the looking ahead. How is this role evolving? What are some of the trends you're seeing? And then also, what are some of the blind spots? Where are some things that you maybe should be thinking about but haven't, or that you're worried that you need to think about but you haven't yet? So maybe let's start with the immediate term, which is, we've talked about obviously the imperatives that the COVID-19 pandemic has really been an impetus for driving to try to not just build back better, but to really help a more sustainable growth in across the world. So what are maybe your top 2 or 3 priorities for the next year that you're particularly focused on? I don't know, maybe Lara, we can start with you on this one.
Thank you, Geir. I mean, COVID-19, of course, is about recovery better, but first, of course, was being part of the solution and trying to minimize the economic and financial stress in our customers and, I mean, in our stakeholders. No? And that was very much a priority for 2020. And unfortunate, due to how long it is lasting, it remains being. So trying really to be part of the solution and help our customers as much as we can, of course, remains for us being a must. Then about priorities, I think that people, and there was also a question about training. I think people attention about ESG being relevant has also already been achieved, because everything we've said. But now the people are making them the question, or how is that they can contribute into it, and what is the role on doing such? Of course, some areas have it very clearly. I already referred to it, environmental and social risk, corporate investment banking, because it's already part of the day-to-day, but it's not the case in all teams. So ensuring training from the board level to managers and technical staff, so that we can really align and make them think about ESG, I think is also very relevant. And then, of course, having a clear sense of purpose in terms of climate, it is a must, because as I said, this is the decade. So we are having the COP26 in November. I already engaged around the COP25 when it took place in Madrid in December 2019. And I know how, what a high momentum is created around, no? And so I think that that is a must also for the coming months, no doubt about it. And then it comes a long list here, of course. It's very difficult to choose, as I said, but it's also right that you need to focus if you really want to make the difference and progress, no? So I would stop with those three. Thank you.
Are huge. I don't know, Andrew or Val or Vanessa.
Yeah, perhaps I could just pick up. I think it's fascinating actually. I think I noted that Lara was the only person to use the word transition so far in this panel. But for us, embracing the future transition is a big part of our forward lens. And we talk about the terms ESG, and particularly in the E context, there's been a lot of look back and sort of current status, how green is an organization or a business or an activity. Essentially what we've got now is 3 decades of major change. And we need to think about how the economy is going to transition, how our customers are going to transition. And then when we think about risks and culture and engagement, those are all going to be sort of transition orientated. So are we funding the right transition or are we not? And do we understand, or are we working well with our clients to understand what that transition looks like? So I think actually, if there's kind of one word which really drives the focus from a forward lens, for me, it's embedding that notion of transition into the rest of the organization and the way we think and the way we do business.
Yeah, I will follow on Andrew Greer, if that's all right. I really echo, it is a transition. My first point is accelerated mainstream. I think the main work is to do more faster and make it part of the mainstream. So the CRO function, this just needs to be part of what they do. It needs to be in the risk appetite. It needs to be in the enterprise risk management. It needs to be on the board's agenda. If the board is not looking at this, I mean, in my view, they're being negligent. How can you be a board and have a fiduciary duty to look after the organization's longevity and their reputation, and you're not looking at this? So that mainstreaming must happen, and it must happen fast. Also into the core set of products. Sadly, when you look at sustainable finance, and even in the report, there's a beautiful graphic where you can see, the head of sustainable finance is sort of on the side. No, that can't be. If we're going to have an impact from a financial sector point of view, it has to be mainstream, and that needs to be brought into every day. Secondly, I echo, it is the decade for action on climate. But what I worry about is it's crowding out other things. And then the next thing, I'm sure we've all seen that little graphic, you've got the COVID tsunami, and then you've got the climate change tsunami, and then you have the biodiversity tsunami coming up. I think, yes, let's drive on climate, but let's look at those intersections so we can work smartly and work on those nodes. This is the beauty of systemic thinking. If you can find that sweet spot, you work on one thing, but it actually has many impacts that are positive. So really that mindset of saying, I'm working on this, but I'm looking for those triple, double wins. And finally, it's about credibility and non-financial reporting. I don't hear enough of that, and that worries me. Financial reporting standards are not far away, 23, 24. That's not a long time to prepare, where your non-financial reports need to be at the same level as your financial statements, needs to be auditable. That is a huge amount of work. And if we don't do that, I'm afraid the greenwashing, SDG washing, Paris washing, there's lots of words being invented, will be the norm. And I think then we would have failed the sector. And I didn't spend 17 years in the financial services sector. I still see myself as part of the sector. And I do want us to be part of the team that takes things forward.
And Greer, I guess I can sort of round out this discussion and just sort of amplify what my fellow panelists have said, that, in terms of priorities, some of them are, sort of the how we do things as this work accelerates, as there are increasing expectations for our companies, inside and outside of the company, as we have to increasingly focus on the alignment and organizational aspects of our our roles, and like that will only increase, right? That sort of systemic approach and building the governance systems, that the importance of that will all increase. I think in terms of the what, like what will the priorities be? Um, Completely agree with what Laura just said. Obviously, climate change is, we are being driven by so many factors to focus on climate change. And, I do believe that climate is one of these macro issues where if you are able to, mitigate that and solve that to the extent that we can solve climate change, you will you will in turn help to protect vulnerable communities. You will help to protect biodiversity. I mean, it's sort of one of those fundamental issues that I think if you focus on it, you are able to drive change in other important areas. But we can't have our blinders on. I think we have to, focus with all of the resources required on climate change while also continuing to think about how social and racial equity comes into play. Not just look at stranded assets, but look at stranded communities. And be aware of what's out there and what's next. I think biodiversity, human rights, these are also important. And if you get it wrong, it's a really big deal. And I guess I'll just sort of close by reflecting on an article I read recently about sort of the psychology of a sustainability professional and of human beings, where our brains tend to focus on, we tend to like overweight the risks and overweight the short term, and maybe sort of underweight the long term and underweight the opportunity side. And so I know, we definitely have a tendency to do that. If there's a risk and it feels urgent and immediate and, tomorrow, that's going to demand a lot of our attention. But we also have to, as we prioritize during this extremely busy, noisy time, make sure that we always have our eye on the long-term growth opportunities as well for the company and bringing in those perspectives as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point about the risks and the opportunities. We here at the IIF obviously try to focus on both sides, but I do think that sometimes that opportunity side, the more long-term vision, gets a little lost sometimes. There is an opportunity for green infrastructure, new products. And that, if we can't just focus on one side of the equation. We're almost out of time. I want to give everybody the opportunity for any last thoughts or anything they want to reinforce before we close out, or something that they want to reinforce that I didn't ask yet. So I'll give everyone a 30 seconds to give us any pearls of wisdom.
I think I just want to echo what Val said. The opportunity side is so important. The conversation really is about long-term value. And if we can have that and have a perspective and balance short, long-term, balance risk opportunity, I think that's a very good step. And the CSO is in a good position to support the CEO and be the thinking partner. I had that same relationships with 3 CEOs at Santam over the years. And it's one of the sort of things I really value, being able to help someone think through things. And I would encourage CSO to step up and do that work and help the executives.
Yes, if I may, I think, my desire is that we are able to align efforts so we focus on material things. And I do agree that, it's really, convincing others, no, and helping them. And the opportunity side give us a great opportunity to engage. When you start talking about risk, regulatory pressure and all that, you may get people's attention, but not passion around it. But when you talk to them about opportunities and meaningful impact, then you get real people attention and willingness to engage. No, so let's talk about the positive sides that are few, without forgetting the risks that are also. I very much agree with Vanessa. Rigorous reporting about this is key. Supporting single ESG reporting and really being rigorous is key. We have an opportunity, let's don't lose it, please. And of course, the IIF can play a key role here, supporting all of us and gathering efforts. And so thank you again.
Great, thank you. And Andrew, I'll give you the last word before we close.
Yeah, no, I think we've sort of touched on it a little bit, but I think right at the essence of the role, which obviously we're sort of really focusing on here, it is making sure that that you create a role which is at the center of the organization, that acts as a magnet for everything to do with sustainability and the thematic here, and bring it together. Navigating the organization is so crucial to be able to enforce the kind of changes we've been talking about on the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And, thank you to all of you. I hope that the audience really enjoyed this engaging discussion. And really a huge thanks to our panelists, to Andrew, to Laura, to Vanessa and Val. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules to discuss this really important topic. If we were in person, this is the time you would hear the thunderous applause, but I'm sure they are occurring virtually. They are occurring here. And finally, one last shameless plug to take a look at the report if you're interested in learning more about the topic. And once again, thank you to Deloitte for being such an excellent partner in this project. And with that, be well and stay safe, and goodbye for now, everybody.